My dad raised his glass with a smirk that already made my stomach twist. It was supposed to be a celebration, a reunion after 7 years our extended family gathered around an impossibly long dining table in the backyard of my parents' house. Twinkling lights overhead catered food linen napkins folded like origami swans. Everyone was smiling, basking in the warm Georgia air and cheap nostalgia. I was trying to smile too, but my nerves were chewing through me like acid. Then he said it. "I'm proud of all my children's." He began thick with southern pride, his words slurred just slightly from the wine. All of them. There was a pause, the kind of pause that crackles, that burns. Except the loser sitting at the table. The silence after felt like a slap. Then came the laughter. Julia, my oldest sister, let out a sharp exhale, the kind that wasn't quite a laugh, but definitely wasn't outrage. My cousin Mark let out a low chuckle like this was something he'd been waiting for. My Uncle Greg shook his head like, there he goes again, while shoveling mashed potatoes into his mouth. And me, I froze. The fork in my hand hovered just above the plate. I hadn't even touched the grilled salmon or the roasted carrots I used to love. I sat there, locked in time, every muscle, rigid eyes darting toward my father, like maybe I misheard him. But no. He didn't flinch, didn't look embarrassed or sorry, just leaned back in his seat, pleased with himself. Everyone knew he meant me. I was the only one at the table without a spouse, the only one without a mortgage, the only one without a flashy title next to my name on LinkedIn. I looked around and waited for someone, anyone, to say something, to break the spell, but nothing came. Not from my mom, who sat frozen next to him stirring her iced tea with a straw she wasn't drinking from. Not from Julia, whose nails tapped her wine glass like she was waiting for dessert. Not from Nate, my younger brother, who once cried to me on the phone about his failing marriage and still had the audacity to look away like he hadn't just watched our father publicly gut me. I could feel my ears burning. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I just stared at the man who raised me, who taught me how to ride a bike, who used to kiss my forehead and say I was his best girl, and wondered when exactly I became the joke at his table. I'm Brielle, 33 years old, single. No kids. A quiet life, some would say too quiet. I work freelance in digital branding. Basically, I help startups look legit online. It's not glamorous, and no, it's not always stable, but I built it from the ground up. I pay my rent. I stay afloat. I used to think that would be enough, to just stay afloat, to exist. But apparently in this family, existing isn't enough unless you can wear it on your sleeve, unless it comes with headlines, promotions, Christmas cards full of news worth bragging about. I didn't even realize I was standing until I felt the napkin fall off my lap and land softly on the grass. Everyone turned. I reached into my purse. There was no plan. No speech, no dramatic script rehearsed in my head, just instinct. I pulled out a single envelope, cream-colored, handwritten in black ink, to Dad. I walked over to him slowly, heels crunching against the lawn. My hand didn't shake, but my breath did. I placed the envelope in front of his wine glass. "For you," I said. "Happy Father's Day." He looked at it like it was a prank. Then he looked at me. And I met his gaze with a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Then, without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the driveway. Behind me, voices began to murmur. Chairs scraped. Someone said my name, but I kept going. The sun was setting, casting the sky in oranges and purples, like the whole world was on fire. My rental car sat at the edge of the cul-de-sac engine, cold windows fogged. I opened the door, slid in, and took one long breath. I didn't drive away. Not yet. Because what was inside that envelope, it was something I'd written 3 months ago. Something I never thought I'd use. And when he read it, when he finally opened it, he'd understand everything I'd been holding back. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand why this cut so deep. Why I wasn't just the loser at the table. Why this dinner was simply the final nail in a coffin they'd been building around me for decades. Let's rewind to the first crack, to when my father stopped seeing me as his daughter and started seeing me as his disappointment, My father wasn't always like that. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't notice until it started to cost me pieces of myself. When I was 9, I won the regional spelling bee. I still remember the final word, conscientious. I stood up there, knees wobbling, palms, sweating, barely able to breathe as I spelled it out loud. When I got it right, the crowd clapped politely. But my dad, he didn't even smile. He just leaned over to Uncle Greg and muttered, "Cute, but spelling's not going to pay rent." That was the first time I remember feeling small in front of him, like I had accomplished something and he had already found a way to shrink it. My brother Nate, on the other hand, could run 2 laps in gym class without passing out, and it was a cause for celebration. He got a new bike for getting a C+ in math once. Meanwhile, I brought home straight A's and got told, "Don't let it go to your head." The favoritism wasn't loud. It was in the way our dad would show up to Nate's football games, but never to my science fairs. In how he taught Julia how to drive, but told me to ask your mom when I turned 16. In the way he introduced us, "This is Nate, my boy, future lawyer, and this is Julia, our beauty queen." Then came my turn. "This is Brielle. She's the quiet one, always the quiet one, always the afterthought." It didn't matter what I did. I wrote an essay that got published in a national teen journal, no reaction. Got a scholarship to a top college. He joked that the school must have been desperate. When I moved out at 22, he didn't say goodbye. Just handed me a box of light bulbs and said, "You'll need these." Sometimes I wondered if he even knew what I did for a living. When I tried to explain my branding business, he just blinked and said, "So, you post on the internet for people." I stopped explaining after that. But the truth is, it wasn't just him. Mom enabled it too. She played mediator, always smoothing over the rough patches like glue between broken pieces. "You know your father," she'd say. "He doesn't mean it like that." Or worse, "Just try not to take it personally, sweetie." But how do you not take it personally when the man who raised you seems to resent your very existence? The day Nate got his MBA, Dad threw him a backyard party with catered barbecue and a balloon arch. When I launched my first big client, a fashion tech startup that's now valued at $40 million, he sent me a text that just said, "Cool. You still need a real job, though." I kept that message. Sometimes I still read it, just to remind myself what emotional gravity feels like. I once asked Mom quietly during a Christmas cleanup if she thought Dad ever liked me. Not liked, as a person. Someone he'd choose to be around if I weren't blood. She hesitated. That silence told me everything. "I think he just doesn't know how to relate to you," she said. I wanted to scream. I wasn't a riddle to solve. I was his daughter. There was always a distance, a wall of performance. If I wasn't the golden child, the sports star, the trophy wife, then I wasn't worth showing off. But despite all of that, I kept trying. I sent him birthday gifts even when he forgot mine. I showed up for Father's Day even when he rolled his eyes at the card. I helped him apply for a small business loan when his store was failing. Even filled out the paperwork myself. And last year, when he told me he was going to lose the house, I wired him the down payment. Didn't tell anyone, not even my mother. I told myself it was the right thing to do. That family helps family. But as I sat at that dinner table last week staring into his wine-flushed face as he declared to everyone that I was the loser at the table, something in me finally snapped. It wasn't just about that moment. It was about every missed recital, every half-hearted shrug when I tried to share my world, every time he said I was too sensitive or too independent, as if either were a crime. No, that comment wasn't new. It was just the first time he said it loud enough for the rest of the world to hear, and they laughed with him. That's what stung the most, not the insult, the agreement. But I didn't walk out because I was ashamed. I walked out because I had finally reached the end of the script they wrote for me. I had my own words now, and inside that envelope I left on the table was the start of a story he wouldn't see coming. It wasn't the first time he'd embarrassed me in public. Not by a long shot. There was this moment 7 years ago that still loops in my head like a bad commercial. My first real client had just launched their product, a sustainable fashion line for Gen Z. They invited me to their opening event in Atlanta. Big deal. Press. bloggers, investment scouts, and they wanted me there, center stage, to talk about the branding I helped them craft. I was terrified, but also proud. I told my parents about it over Sunday lunch. Mom nodded distractedly, spooning potatoes onto Nate's plate. Dad didn't look up. "I'll be presenting," I said, "on stage, with the founder." They put my name on the banners. Finally, he looked at me. "Are they paying you for that?" "Yes," I said, trying to smile. "Still sounds like fluff," he muttered and went back to cutting his steak. I invited them anyway. Hope is a stubborn thing. They RSVP'd late but said they'd come. They didn't. Instead, I got a text from Julia. "That night, Dad said your little project would probably fold in 6 months. Sorry, LOL, it was always like that. Every time I stepped forward, he was there with a rope to tug me back. Not directly, not overtly, just enough to make me question myself. That's what makes these kinds of wounds so dangerous. They don't scream, they drip." At the dinner last week, that public humiliation hit differently. There was no plausible deniability. No whispered comment, no passive-aggressive remark that I could mentally file away as a fluke. This was a full broadcast. I'm proud of all my children's, except the loser sitting at the table. I kept replaying that moment even after I'd walked out. The sound of the wine glasses clinking afterward, the ripple of polite laughter that followed, like people weren't sure if it was a joke, but laughed anyway, because why not? I'd tried so hard to shrink myself to fit into their world, less opinionated, less loud, less me. But that night made it clear it was never about who I was. It was about who I wasn't. I wasn't Julia the beauty queen turned dentist's wife with 3 kids and a beachfront condo. I wasn't Nate, the golf-playing regional manager with a beer gut and a list of country club connections. I wasn't Dad, whose idea of success hadn't evolved since the 80s. And they reminded me of it every time I stepped into a room. I remember once during Thanksgiving I offered to bring dessert. I spent hours baking a spiced pear tart from scratch, trying something unique. I set it on the table, proud of the glossy glaze, the way it smelled like autumn. Dad took one look and said, "Couldn't you have just brought a pie like everyone else? That was him in a nutshell. If you didn't follow the script, you didn't count. It didn't matter that I paid my own bills, or that I helped Nate's wife find a graphic designer for her Etsy shop free of charge, or that I'd Venmoed Julia $300 once when her AC broke during a heat wave. Quietly, without being asked. None of it mattered because I didn't look the part. I didn't have the family, the title, the ring. But they didn't know about the real wins. The 6-figure consulting contract I landed with a West Coast health tech firm. The app launch I'd helped go viral, 6 million downloads in under a month. The anonymous angel investment I made in a small candle shop that's now expanding to 4 states. I didn't advertise those things. Maybe that was my mistake. But I had my reasons. I didn't want praise. I wanted peace. And yet every time I returned to that house, I left with less of myself. That night, after I left the dinner, I drove downtown, parked near the bridge that overlooks the river. The city lights glimmered off the water like they were dancing for me. It was late, but I needed to breathe, to remember that there was a world outside that backyard, one that didn't revolve around Dad's approval. My phone buzzed. One message. From Aria, my niece. "Are you mad, Auntie Bree? I thought it would be fun." I nearly cried. She was the only one who ever looked at me like I mattered, who asked about my work, who drew little logos for fake companies and asked if I could make them real. She didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She just missed me. And in that moment, I realized something that shocked me to my core. I had spent years letting people humiliate me in silence because I thought it was the price of family, but not anymore. Because humiliation, when repeated enough times, doesn't just sting, it solidifies into resolve. And I had just reached the boiling point. I would never give them another seat at my table, not without paying the price. I didn't go home that night. Not to the Airbnb I rented, not even to the hotel I booked as a backup in case my parents tried to guilt stay me. Instead, I drove for hours. No music, no calls, just silence, and the sound of tires against wet asphalt. The streetlights blurred into gold ribbons as I passed city signs that felt like memories I didn't ask for. I ended up in a tiny town about 2 hours north, found a cheap roadside inn with flickering neon and a vacancy sign that buzzed like it had something to prove. The woman behind the desk didn't ask for much, just my ID and credit card. She handed me the key without judgment. I liked her immediately. Room 206 smelled faintly of old linens and lemon cleaner, the kind of room where time slows down. I kicked off my shoes, sank into the bed still in my dress from the dinner, and stared at the ceiling for a long, long time. That night, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the pain had turned into something else. Clarity. Have you ever reached that strange emotional cliff where your body is too exhausted to grieve, so your mind just starts planning? That's where I was. Planning. Reviewing. Replaying every interaction with my father like they were surveillance tapes from a courtroom drama. I thought about my 12th birthday. I'd wanted a bookbinding kit. He got me a pink soccer ball. When I looked confused, he barked, "Girls can be tough too, you know." I thought about junior prom. He refused to take pictures, said I looked like I was trying too hard. And I thought about that envelope I left on the table. Inside, it was something I'd written months ago, long before the dinner, long before the public insult. A letter, a confession, a receipt, and a warning. Because I knew this day would come. Maybe not with that exact quote, not with that crowd, but something like it. That's how these things work. You spend your whole life hoping it'll get better, and then one day the mask slips for good. And that's the day you either break or you wake up. I woke up. The next morning, I sat at the desk in the motel room and opened my laptop. I hadn't checked my work email in 2 days. I was supposed to be on vacation, if you could call visiting your emotional minefield of a family a vacation. But the first email in my inbox wasn't from a client. It was from my bank, a confirmation of transfer. 4 months ago, I'd created a trust one Dad didn't know about. It had specific clauses. One of them allowed me to revoke asset access if certain conditions were met. Public humiliation, for example, documented in video or witness testimony. Guess what was being shared around the cousins group chat? That morning, I scrolled a little further. Julia had posted a clip. You could clearly hear Dad's voice slurring through the toast. "I'm proud of all my children's." Except the loser sitting at the table. You could hear laughter. You could see me, frozen hurt. Perfect. I forwarded it to my attorney with 2 words, initiate withdrawal. Then I closed the laptop and breathed. I felt taller somehow, lighter, like I was peeling off a coat I didn't realize I'd been wearing since childhood, one stitched with invisible threads of obligation guilt and false hope. That morning, I left the motel and drove to a local diner, the kind where waitresses call you hon and refill your coffee before you ask. I sat by the window, scribbling on a napkin, watching the rain turn into sunlight. I started drafting a list, not of revenge, of return. Return to self, return to people who made me feel seen, friends who cheered for my wins, clients who sent thank you letters with handwritten notes, my mentor, Janine, who once told me, "You don't have to audition for Love Brielle, not in business, not in life." I added Aria's name, circled it. She deserved better, too. That day became the first of many small resets. I changed my number, unfollowed every cousin who laughed, blocked Julie and Nate, even Mom for now. I didn't hate them. I just needed distance, silence. Space to remember who I was before I started doubting everything that made me me. Back in my apartment, I decluttered every drawer, donated clothes I kept for family visits, tossed outdated birthday cards that never had personal messages, burned a photo in my sink, me and Dad at a baseball game, smiling like everything had been okay. It wasn't. It never really had been. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop, titled it Exit Strategy. Executed. And slowly I began to rebuild. But this time, not in the shadows. This time they'd feel it, even if they didn't understand it yet. My apartment had never felt like much before. It was clean, minimal, not quite cold, but not warm either. But when I walked back through the door after that detour to nowhere, it suddenly felt like mine. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl near the entryway, the one I bought at that street market in Savannah. I'd almost gifted it to Mom once. I'm glad I didn't. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee even though it was nearly 7 p.m. I needed the ritual, the warmth in my hands, the smell of something familiar that didn't judge or dismiss or call me a loser behind polite smiles. Just the sound of the machine humming the soft click of the mug against the counter. That night I worked. I didn't intend to, but the laptop practically opened itself. Emails poured in questions, ideas, proposals. Some of these people didn't even know I was out of town, and they were still seeking my guidance. I started answering them one by one, slowly, deliberately. I fixed a broken brand deck for a startup in Austin, rewrote a founder's pitch in Nashville, sketched a social roadmap for a new vegan meal delivery service in Oregon. It felt like oxygen. Every slide, every email, every correction proof, I wasn't just something. I was someone. By midnight, I had closed 3 new contracts. I took a break, leaned back in my chair, and looked around my apartment. There was a peace in that moment I hadn't known in years, maybe ever. The next morning, I woke up early. No alarm, just energy. I called Janine, my old mentor, the closest thing I have to a professional fairy godmother. About time, she said when she picked up, "You sound awake." "I think I am," I replied, and I meant it. We talked for an hour. By the end of the call, she had offered me a spot on a panel she was organizing in New York, something I'd previously been too scared to say yes to. "Send me your bio," she said. Not the humble version, the real one. I opened a blank doc, typed my name, Brielle Donovan, digital strategist, brand therapist, consultant, and then I added a new line I'd never dared to write before keynote speaker. That same week, I decided to give my apartment a real shot at feeling alive. I bought new plants, framed my favorite print from an old client, "You Are Not Too Much." I even ordered a new couch, not practical gray, but emerald green velvet, loud, luxurious, entirely unnecessary, exactly what I deserved. Later, I went to the small bakery down the street, the one I passed 100 times but never entered. I bought 2 croissants and sat by the window with my laptop tweaking my portfolio while sunlight poured over my screen like approval. It's strange once you stop seeking it from the wrong places, validation finds you elsewhere. In your inbox, in the way strangers smile, in the way you catch yourself humming without realizing it. I found myself replying more freely to inquiries, no longer censoring my tone to seem nice enough. I stopped second-guessing whether I deserved the fees I quoted. I raised them, and no one blinked. One client even replied, "Finally, I was starting to think you didn't know how good you are." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, not the cheap stuff, but the bottle I'd been saving for some elusive celebration. I toasted myself to the beginning of something better, something freer. I didn't need applause for it, but I knew deep in my chest I'd just cracked open a new chapter. And even if no one from that family ever saw it, no, they'd feel the tremors soon enough. It's a strange thing to be succeeding in silence, to watch your life bloom like spring under snow while the people who once belittled you still picture you wilting. A month passed, then 2, and somehow no one in my family reached out, not to ask why I'd walked out of the reunion, not to check if I was okay, not even to scold me for ruining the dinner which I expected honestly. Radio silence. And I was fine with it. Better than fine. Because without the noise, I could finally hear myself think. I'd landed 5 new long-term clients. One was a Fortune 500 subsidiary, which meant I was now consulting across 3 time zones. The income, alone, made my old imposter syndrome whimper and crawl back into its hole. But none of it was on social media. I didn't post big announcements. No humble brag LinkedIn status, no filtered selfies with Hank's Boss Life hashtags. I didn't need the world to clap. I just wanted to sit with the proof that I could. I spent more time with my friend group people who didn't measure success in job titles or zip codes. We had game nights, cookouts, spontaneous target runs. I let myself laugh big and messy. Let myself show up in leggings and no makeup without wondering what someone would whisper. I saw Aria once too, my niece. Her mom, my sister-in-law Danielle, reached out quietly, almost guiltily. "She misses you," she texted. "Can we meet at the park, just you and her?" I didn't blame Danielle. She'd always walked on eggshells around my family trying to keep the peace, but she never once looked down on me, and that counted for something. We met on a sunny Saturday. Aria ran toward me like she hadn't aged a day, arms wide, eyes bright. "I made you something," she said, pulling a folded sheet of paper from her tiny backpack. It was a drawing, a girl in a superhero cape standing on a stage with a laptop. Underneath, in crooked letters, "Auntie Bree saves the day." I blinked fast, swallowed a lump in my throat. "Why am I on a stage?" I asked gently. "Because you're famous," she said like it was obvious. "Even if Grandpa doesn't see it. Even if Grandpa doesn't see it." That stayed with me. She hugged me tight before she left her arms around my waist, her face pressed against my coat. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered to someone in that bloodline. Later that week, Julia posted another photo on Facebook, her new kitchen renovation, captioned, "With some of us work hard and make things happen." It wasn't subtle. I didn't comment, didn't like, didn't engage. Because I had just received a different kind of message, an invitation to speak at a private branding retreat in Colorado. All expenses paid. Keynote slot. They'd seen my deck from a past project and wanted my voice to open the weekend. I read the email 3 times, then emailed back with a calm confidence I'd never had before. "Happy to accept. Please forward the speaker's schedule and I'll confirm travel by EOD." Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. Past the park, past the bookstore, down to the old cobblestone path where kids skateboarded and dogs barked at pigeons. The sun was hitting everything just right. Not too warm, not too bright, just enough. I passed a couple arguing about takeout, a group of teens filming something for TikTok, a woman with gray braids writing poetry into her phone, and I realized I wasn't just surviving without them. I was living, not in defiance, in freedom, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't last forever. Eventually, someone would reach out. Someone would come knocking, not with kindness, but with need, and I was already preparing for it. Quiet wins were still wins, and soon they'd echo, even in the halls where I was once called invisible. It started with a voicemail from an unknown number. "Hey, Brielle, it's Nate, your brother," as if I'd forgotten. He coughed awkwardly before continuing. "Listen, I know things got kind of weird at the reunion, but, Dad didn't really mean it. You know how he gets when he drinks. Anyway, I was wondering if we could maybe talk sometime. There's actually something I kind of need help with." There it was, the crack in the silence, the first tremor. It would have been laughable if it didn't sting so much. Not because he asked for help, but because he never once said sorry. Never once acknowledged the moment, that exact quote that still sat in my chest like shrapnel. Just a vague wave of the hand, a clumsy effort to rewrite history. I didn't respond. Not yet. 3 days later, Julia texted. No greeting, no context. "Hey, do you still do logos and branding stuff?" That was it. No "how are you?" No "hope you're well." Just a request, like I was a vending machine she hadn't used in a while. Turns out her friend was launching a boutique skincare line and needed help getting things off the ground. I ignored her too, but I started watching how the energy shifted. The silence wasn't real. It was strategy. They thought I'd cool off, that I'd come crawling back out of guilt like I always did, like I had when Nate forgot my birthday 2 years in a row and I still showed up for his son's baptism with a gift, like I had when Julia excluded me from her bridal party but asked me to do all the design work anyway, and I did for free. But I had rewritten that script, and this time I was in control of the next scene. The kicker came 2 weeks later. I was on a Zoom call with a new client, one of the biggest I'd ever landed. Mid-call, as we were discussing design phases, an email pinged through on my second screen. Subject line urgent, Dad's request. It was from my mother. I clicked it. "Hi, Brielle. Your father has been trying to reach you. He said you haven't responded to Nate or Julia. He's confused and honestly a little hurt. He wants to know if you'll come by the house sometime this week. He wants to talk to you privately. Also, he mentioned something about the car title. I didn't understand it fully, but he seems anxious. Please let me know. Love, Mom. The car. Of course. The luxury Tesla he'd been parading around for the past year thinking it was his, the one I had purchased quietly, insured under my LLC, registered under a temporary transfer agreement that expired last month, the one that on paper was legally mine again. I closed the email, let out a long, slow breath. So that's why he suddenly wanted to talk. I didn't reply to her either, but I did something else. I called my lawyer, asked her to file the title reversion documents, not with aggression, just formally, neatly, like tying a bow on something that had long since unraveled. 2 days later, the car was picked up from their driveway by a flatbed tow truck. I didn't even have to be there. My lawyer sent me a photo of the retrieval just for records. In the image, Dad stood on the porch in a bathrobe, arms raised in fury, mouth wide, like a man who hadn't realized the rules no longer favored him. He looked small, so small. It wasn't revenge, it was just math. You subtract trust long enough, eventually the balance hits zero, and I was done overdrafting my soul for their comfort. Later that night, my phone buzzed again, a number I hadn't seen in years. Uncle Greg. Voicemail again. Brielle. I don't know what's going on, but your dad's in a bad way. He's saying something about a trap is set up. You should come talk to him. I smiled, not cruelly, just knowingly. Because what they didn't know was that the real trap hadn't even sprung yet. That envelope I left on the table, he'd opened it too late. And now he was beginning to understand. It was a Wednesday when I returned. Not for them, not for peace, but for punctuation. I didn't knock. I walked into my childhood home like it was a meeting I had scheduled months ago, which in a way it was. Mom opened the door with a startled breath. Brielle, what is he here? I asked. She stepped aside without answering. The house was exactly the same and entirely different. The smell of lemon polish clung to the air like it was trying to cover something rotten. Family photos lined the hallway, none of me past age 16. I stepped past the living room and into the dining area where he sat in the same chair he used when he humiliated me. This time, no glass in his hand. He looked older, smaller, almost like he'd shrunk into the accusation that still echoed in my bones. You came, he said. I didn't sit. I placed a copy of the legal title transfer on the table in front of him. My name was printed at the top in bold, unmissable font. You opened the envelope, I asked. He nodded, slowly. What is all this? The trust. The contract. The clause. It's called protection, I said, voice level. And foresight. I don't understand. You didn't have to. That's the point. He picked up the paper, squinting at the lines. So what, you were just waiting to humiliate me? No, I said. I was waiting for you to tell the world exactly how you saw me. I paused, leaned slightly forward. And you did. At the family reunion. He swallowed. It was a joke. A don't I cut in, don't rewrite it. You knew exactly what you were saying. And they laughed because they've heard it before. Maybe not that loud, but enough to believe it. Silence stretched. Then the door opened behind us. I turned. Julia, Nate, and Aria. I blinked at Danielle, who stood awkwardly beside them, mouthing, I'm sorry, with her eyes. They all looked confused, like they hadn't been told I'd be here, which made sense. This wasn't his show anymore. I cleared my throat. Great, you're all here. Makes this easier. I walked to the head of the table, the spot where he usually sat with his carving knife and his crown of self-importance. I just want to say one thing, I said, scanning the room. You don't get to keep rewriting who I am, Julia began. I held up a hand. No, you've had the mic long enough, you all have. And then loud enough to make the room go still. I said, at the family dinner, Dad said, I'm proud of all my children's. except the loser sitting at the table. Gasps. Julia's eyes widened. Nate actually flinched. I wasn't going to respond, I continued. I was going to let that rot in your group chats and die a slow digital death. But then you started calling. Not to apologize. Not to check on me, but to ask for help. Favors, logos, money, a car that never belonged to you in the first place. Dad stood rage flaring. You've always been dramatic. You know I said firm now. I've always been underestimated. That's different. I turned to Arya, who stood frozen, a bit too young to understand all the legal jargon, but just old enough to sense a shift. I'm not angry anymore, I said softly this time for her. I'm just done. And with that, I walked out. Through the hallway of forgotten photos, through the entryway where my baby shoes once sat in a shadow box, past the porch where my father used to sip beer and pretend I didn't exist. I made it to the driveway when I heard it. A scream, raw, confused, broken. He had finally opened the second envelope, the one I left in the glove compartment of the Tesla when the tow truck picked it up. It was a notarized statement. This vehicle was gifted under the assumption of familial respect. Upon breach of that condition, all privileges and possessions are revoked. This was not a car. This was a test, and you failed. Behind me, the door slammed open. "What is this?" he yelled, voice cracking. "You think you can do this to me?" I turned just once. "You did it to yourself." The scream echoed down the block, desperate, disoriented, almost feral. For a split second, I saw the same man who once taught me how to fish, who used to hold my hand crossing the street. But then that memory dissolved, replaced by the man who called me a loser in front of 20 people who said nothing. I didn't look back again. Let him rage. Let him burn. It was time his mirror showed him what he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. That evening, the ripple effect began. Julia posted a now-deleted Instagram story, white background, black text, "Some people take family matters too far." Imagine humiliating your own father. It only made things worse, because someone replied to her story with the video, the one from the reunion, the exact moment. Dad's toast, my face, the laughter, the silence that followed. And someone else shared it publicly. I didn't post it, but I didn't stop it either. By morning, it had spread beyond our family circle. A small gossip blog picked it up after a cousin's friend shared it with the caption, "This is what emotional abuse in families looks like." Watch the dad's face. The comments were brutal. Imagine raising a daughter and calling her a loser on camera. She walked out with more dignity than the rest of them combined. This is why some people go no contact, and they're right to. For once, I wasn't the one on trial. He was. The founder of Donovan Construction, the man who built a modest empire of suburban homes and handshake deals, now publicly known as that father. Clients started pulling back. One backed out of a land development contract. Another more quietly called to pause discussions indefinitely. He tried to control the narrative, of course, told everyone I'd manipulated the footage, that it was taken out of context, that I was unstable, always dramatic. But no one believed it, because for once, the evidence spoke louder than his pride. Nate called me. Twice. Left a voicemail. Brielle. "I don't know what you're doing. Dad's a wreck. Julia's blaming you for the blowback. Everyone's talking. This is tearing the family apart. Good. Let it fall." I didn't owe anyone a soft landing. For decades, I had to smile through my own erasure, every eye roll, every sarcastic jab, every dinner where my name was left out of the toast. Now the silence was working for me. I received an email from a local news producer. They were working on a short feature about family scapegoats who turn the tables. They asked if I'd be willing to share my story anonymously. I declined. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't need the spotlight anymore. The justice was already unfolding, slow, clean, undeniable. The final blow came a week later. I received a forwarded email from an industry partner. Subject: termination of joint branding effort. Donovan Construction. My jaw tightened as I read the body. After recent public developments involving Mr. Donovan's personal conduct, our board has voted to withdraw from the upcoming Home Expo partnership. We no longer feel the alignment reflects our values. I saved the email, printed it, filed it in a folder labeled Unasked for Apologies. He lost the expo, the sponsorship, the final thread of the illusion, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt about any of it, only clarity. Because you can't destroy someone who's already risen from your wreckage. You can't control a daughter who no longer needs your approval. You can only watch her walk away and realize too late that she built herself from the pieces you tried to discard. The first morning I truly felt free didn't start with a headline or a contract or a clapback. It started with birdsong. I had just moved. Not far, just to a new part of the city, somewhere quieter with trees that danced in the wind and a kitchen that caught the morning light just right. The kind of place where the walls didn't echo with old stories or guilt. A clean page. I woke up without an alarm. The air was crisp, the sun soft through sheer curtains, and for once I didn't reach for my phone. No notifications from people I no longer needed. No texts asking me to do emotional labor I never signed up for. Just coffee, my favorite mug, a blank notebook waiting to be filled not with plans for survival, but dreams. I sat out on the balcony with a blanket over my legs and let my thoughts stretch. I didn't feel rushed, didn't feel invisible. I felt calm, whole. For the first time in decades, my life was mine. Not edited to fit someone else's narrative, not diluted to keep the peace, not borrowed, not conditional, not performative. I was no longer auditioning for love I had already earned. It's funny, when you're raised in a family that only praises what they can parade, you learn to mistrust your own quiet wins. You question if what you've built counts, if success still matters when no one claps. But now I don't need applause. I only need truth. And the truth is, I built a life from grit and grace, without handouts, without shortcuts. I learned how to hold my own hand when no one else reached out. I started volunteering with a small nonprofit that mentors young women entering creative careers. One of the girls, Nia, asked me, "How do you know when you're successful?" And I told her the truth. When your joy no longer requires permission. I watched her write that down like it was scripture. And I felt something shift. My story didn't end in that dining room. It began there. Because if your greatest pain becomes the reason you protect someone else from that same wound, then maybe it was never in vain. Sometimes I still think about the old house. I imagine it quiet now. Too quiet. I imagine Dad wondering when the calls stopped, when the network dried up, when the car disappeared and never came back. Maybe he wonders if I'll forgive him someday. Maybe he doesn't. But either way, I no longer carry that question like a stone in my chest. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let their shadow decide your shape. I take long walks now. No headphones. Just me, the breeze, and the steady rhythm of my steps. I've started writing again, personal essays, little reflections. Nothing big. But they feel honest in a way I forgot writing could feel. I send Aria a postcard every month. She draws hearts on the return envelopes and signs them, "Your #1 fan." That's all the legacy I need. I may not have made the guest list for Julia's baby shower, may not be tagged in Nate's vacation albums, may not be included in Dad's revised version of Family, but I'm not missing anything. They are. They'll never know the freedom of being known as you, or not as they wish you were. And I'll never again trade my truth for their comfort. It was almost poetic how it came full circle. 3 months after the dinner, I received a certified envelope in the mail. Thick, formal, the kind of thing that usually triggers dread, but not this time. It was from my father's lawyer. At first I thought it might be retaliation, some petty attempt at legal pressure over the car, or the public embarrassment he still pretended hadn't happened. But when I opened it, something unexpected fell out. A letter. Not typed handwritten, in his unmistakable blocky scrawl, the same one he used on sticky notes for chores and birthday cards, that said, "From Dad," with no message. Brielle. If you're reading this, then I've probably already embarrassed myself worse than I know how to fix. I don't expect this to change anything, but I need you to know something. I knew what I was doing that night. I knew what I was saying. I just didn't expect you to leave. I thought you'd laugh, or roll your eyes, or let it pass like every other time. I didn't think you'd actually go. When you didn't come back, something shifted, not just in the house, in me. You were always the quiet one. But that didn't mean you were small. I see that now. I saw it too late, like I do with most things. The car, the trust. Whatever that was, it was smart. Ruthless, but smart. You played the game better than I ever could. And part of me respects it. I don't know if I was ever a good father to you. I wanted to be, I really did. But I didn't know how to handle a daughter I couldn't shape. I've never told you this, but the night you launched your first brand, I watched the live stream. You were brilliant. I said it out loud. Your mother heard me, but I never told you. That was my failure. One of many. I hope you're okay. And if you're not, I hope you're getting there. Dad. I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't even feel warm. I just felt still. Like the part of me that had been waiting to hear those words, some version of them at least finally stopped pacing. He was right. I had left. Not just the dinner. I had walked out of the role they kept writing me into, the passive daughter, the fallback plan, the family ATM. And I had walked into something sharper, stronger, mine. But what he didn't know was that I'd written my letter months earlier. The one I left in the envelope on that table. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even long. It was one paragraph. You don't have to be proud of me. You don't have to understand me. You just have to believe that I am enough without your permission. That was it. Simple. Final. I tucked his letter into a drawer, not to keep it hidden, but to mark it. A relic. A page in the chapter I had already closed. He may never say those words to my face. He may never undo what he broke. But that letter proved one thing he knew. And maybe that was the twist. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need repair. I only needed to be seen. And now, even in silence, I was. If you're still here listening, watching, or reading, thank you. Thank you for sitting with me in the silence between the words. Thank you for not looking away when it got uncomfortable. Because I think the truth is, we all have a version of that dinner. That one moment where someone we love, someone who is supposed to protect us, makes us feel small on purpose. Where a room full of people lets it happen. Where laughter replaces love. Where silence becomes betrayal. And if you've ever been there at the edge of that table, swallowing shame, pretending it didn't hurt, then I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the problem. You never were. You are not too sensitive. You are not too quiet. You are not a loser. Just because someone decided your life doesn't look like theirs. You don't owe anyone an explanation for building a life that doesn't perform on cue. You don't owe family access to your peace if they only ever came to take from it. You can leave. You can start over without starting from scratch because every scar you carry is still part of the map. You can walk out of that house, that job, that friendship, that story, and you don't have to slam the door. You can simply close it. And you don't need the people who broke you to help you heal. Some of us grow stronger in spite of the people who raised us. Some of us become legends in families that barely learned our names. And some of us, like me, write our way out. If you're in the middle of your chapter, I want you to know it's okay if it's messy. It's okay if you don't have a grand reveal or a luxury car or a legal plan. Sometimes the biggest power move is surviving anyway. Sometimes the most radical act is not responding to the text, or not answering the call, or choosing not to show up. Sometimes healing looks like coffee alone at a window with a view only you understand. Sometimes it looks like staying quiet until you're ready to speak. So here's to you if your father called you a loser. If your sister rolled her eyes when you said you were proud of something small, if your family never cheered, never listened, never looked, you're not invisible. You're not broken. You're just becoming. And someday, if not today, someone will look at the pieces you picked up alone and they will say, "How did you make something so beautiful out of that?" And you'll smile. Because you already knew.